The Demon's Smile. I was a 13-year-old girl. I'm now 25. My best friend, we'll call her Sarah, and two other boys in our grade decided to hang out in town. We grew up in a small town in New Jersey, where there wasn't much to do besides hang out at local parks and such in the area. We decided to walk to this one park on a lake that sits at the bottom of a large wooded hill. On top of the hill is a cemetery. It was broad daylight in the early afternoon, so being young and dumb, we decided to just take a walk through the cemetery and thought nothing of it. My best friend was wiping off debris from the tombstones and monuments in an effort to respect the dead. As she did this, we were reading the gravestones and speaking aloud the names of the deceased individuals. It was actually really peaceful. The four of us then decided to sit in a patch of grass a little way away from the graves to relax after walking around. We naturally sat in a circle formation, and Sarah was next to me on my left. We were engaged in conversation when I suddenly noticed that Sarah had gone really quiet. I looked over at her, and she was staring off into nothing. I immediately asked her if she was okay, and she sort of snapped out of it and said, "Yes, she's fine." A minute or so later she was staring into space again, and now she had covered her ears. I asked her what was going on, and she said, "I can't hear, they're screaming at us." Now I'm terrified, and I ask, "Who is screaming?" She doesn't respond, and starts to rock back and forth. My heart is beating out of my chest. I call her name again, and instinctively throw my cell phone, a bulky NV2, right at her head. She didn't even flinch. She rocked back and forth a few more times, before looking down into her lap. Then she looks up at me, with the most evil, demonic smile. Her face was fixed in an expression I've never ever seen her make, and so it didn't even look like her face. Immediately, I knew she was possessed. This was my absolute worst nightmare come true, and I was terrified to my core. There are no words to describe the overwhelming amount of fear that consumed me. My fight or flight response kicked in, and I just blacked out. I came to a few seconds later, and found myself about 100 feet away from her and the boys. She was still staring at me, smiling completely, still not even blinking. I was screaming and crying her name, and I was frozen with fear. She finally broke her demonic gaze from me, looked back into her lap, got up, and ran away right into the woods. It took me a few seconds to unfreeze, and I came to the realization that she was in danger, and I needed to go after her. I ran and grabbed my cell phone, and followed her into the woods down the hill, and to the park area, where I find her sitting on a swing. I approach her, and I ask her if she's okay. She is extremely disoriented and asks, "Where are we? We need to stay. We need to go back." I said, "No way are we staying. We need to get the hell out of here." And I literally have to drag this girl out of the park. The park and cemetery are located on Native American grounds. There were a group of people at the park for a cultural event who asked us if we were okay, and if one of us had screamed. I just said yes, it was me, and that everything's fine. Sarah did not remember anything that happened. She said she remembers sitting down with us on the grass, and she remembered the voices screaming at us, and that they were telling us to leave. Then she said that she felt like she was having a nightmare, and was dreaming of what she assumed to be hell, because there was fire everywhere. She didn't recall saying she wanted to stay at the park, or being dragged out. Distorted Replay. Me and my friend went up to Walmart. There's this pavement trail up behind my neighborhood basketball court. All of a sudden, 3 people practically materialized in front of us. We thought nothing of it at first, as the trail is commonly used. However, upon closer inspection, the people looked just like our 3 friends, down to an exact point. Normally I would have no problem with seeing my friends like this. However, one of the friends had gone to Georgia, and the others were at their house. Around this point we got creeped out, but oh well, might as well keep going. We get about halfway up the trail and one of our friends' voices calls out, the voice being exact in cadence and tone and you name it. This is where things got weirder. Me and my friend both turned to each other and asked if that was really our friend. From there, we braced ourselves for a silly jump scare and turned the corner of the trail, but they were gone. We kept going and saw them again, this time in a home goods parking lot on the way there. We were able to get a good look at them, as we were far enough away not to be detected, but close enough to get details. One of them, our younger friend of the group, was standing at an angle, and I checked his face for identifiable features, but there was no face. There was no features whatsoever on his face. It mortified me. The others turned around a little bit at the same angle, as they were preparing to get to the next part of the trail that led directly to Walmart. Their faces were all contorted. Physically impossible kind of contortion. Then I realized they were following a particular pathway that we followed about a month ago. Down to the foot placement, the people placement, everything was the same. They rounded the corner and we followed not far behind. But then they were gone. Entirely gone. No trace, nothing. Like they didn't exist. Apparition of the living. 7 or so years ago, I was coming home to my parents' house where I lived at the time. I was the passenger in my friend's car, so when I saw that my mum just so happened to be at the bottom of the stairs where I'd get dropped off, I stuck my head out and waved, and she waved back. She was also watering the plants with the hose at that moment. Between the time I got out of the car, walked up the stairs and into the door, my mum was no longer outside. Not that unusual. But when I got upstairs, she was on the ground, on her hands and knees, cleaning our tile floors. It was pretty obvious that she had been working at it for a while too. She hadn't just sat down after coming inside from the garden like I had expected her to do. So I asked my mum how she made it inside so fast, and she just looked at me with complete confusion. So I said, "You were just waving to me when I came home." And she explained to me that she had been inside cleaning the floors for a couple of hours now. A deep sadness remains. My roommate at the time was going through one hell of a year. She had found out that her father had been cheating on her mother for years and was dealing with their messy divorce. Meanwhile, her grandmother in Iowa suffered from some sudden health issues, which resulted in her having to sell her house and move into assisted living. Since I deal with antiques and vintage items for a living, they asked me to come down to the house and tell them what's valuable and what should be tossed. They had already started the initial clear out. Before I got there, they had mentioned that they found an old Ouija board in a closet that no one remembered seeing before. The house itself was an old farmhouse that seemed to date from the 1870s. The farmland around it had recently been developed with large homes. The barns were gone, save for a large workshop where my roommate's grandfather spent much of his free time. Walking through the kitchen door of this house, I immediately just didn't like it. The only way I can describe it was oppressive. It was dark and sad. It was also a time warp. Think of a rural farmhouse in Iowa in the 1960s, and this was it. Off the kitchen was a living room and a small office. Here's where I'm going to lose people. But there was a woman in the corner of the living room. I didn't see her. I just knew she was there. I even know what she was wearing. Edwardian white dress with a bustle, hair done up in a bun, and just sad. I found it hard to be in there, and kept having to go outside. I also got the feeling that this woman hated men. I did mention to my roommate what I felt, but she just brushed it off until she came up to me and said, "I saw her." Here's where I'm going to lose the rest of you. My roommate, her mother, and I stood in the doorway for several minutes just watching her, or it. It literally looked like a shadow being cast on the wallpaper, but it almost seemed to be three-dimensional at times. A perfect profile of a woman. I tried moving things around in the room, and tried standing in front of windows, but it wasn't a shadow. It was on the wallpaper. After a few minutes, my roommate's mother gasped, "The blood!" I had no idea what she meant until I saw it too. This shadow, or stain, or whatever it was, had blood running down its front. The word miscarriage suddenly popped into my head. After a while, the whole thing faded, and by the time we left, the wallpaper was completely unblemished.